All right, everybody, here we are at Slapshot's East Coast headquarters. You guys remember Vice Admiral Ted Slapshot Carter. Been on the channel twice before. First episode was How to Be a Carrier CO. Second episode was Everything You Didn't Know About Taking a Tomcat to War. And we saw each other at the last home football game.
Yeah, against
on the
Tulsa,
sidelines
right?
Against Tulsa. Great game for Navy. And we're like, you know what? We've never done this in person.
Right.
So we're like, well, why don't you come by the house and we can chat about the third in the Ted trilogy, which is Everything You Didn't Know About Being a Flag Officer.
Yeah.
So only about 20% of captains, 06s, make flag. So ultimately you have at any given time about 171 stars, and I think that number's actually gone down.
It's gone down. I think it's 150, 153 active duty flags, and of course we have some reserve flags. So, you know, the numbers are probably closer to where you are in the total.
So talk to us about your experience. How did you find out? And what did you hear anecdotally that went into the decision to make you into a Rear Admiral?
Well, again, for the viewers, you know, being a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier captain is a fairly high percentage, higher percentage than most other jobs to make flag. At the time, it was roughly about a 50% chance of making flag. You usually had 2 looks at it, and you had to be selected before your 30th year in service. In my case, I was at my 28th year of service, but I had a unique carrier job. I was in charge of refueling and complex overhaul for the USS Carl Vinson, the third in the Nimitz class line that was going through this, you know, what I would call a frame-off restoration process, a $2 billion shipyard job to give that carrier the second half of its life. You know, you do this job at the 25-year point of the aircraft carrier.
And we'll remind viewers that you talk about that process in great length in the Everything You Didn't Know About Being a Carrier CO episode. So if you haven't seen that, check it out.
So I thought my chance of making flag was relatively low. I was not a traditional aircraft carrier captain that took a ship out to sea, or even a new build aircraft carrier CO, and we'd had carrier COs make flag out of that. I was only the third to have gone through this process, but we did deliver Carl Vinson on time and under budget, or we were on schedule to when the flag board met. My fitness reports were competitive amongst all of the Commodores and shore-based captains in command. So I was in a competitive group of about 23 captains, and I had #1 rankings on all of my reports. So I had good paper, but that's not enough. There are many other intangibles that go into getting that selection. So anyway, I did get selected, and I think there were 4 carrier COs that were selected that year for the aviation community. I took the phone call from the air boss that said, hey, you're going to be selected. The list hadn't come out yet, and that was, you know, just a few weeks prior to it getting out. So I was blown away that, yes, my career is now going to continue. I'm not going to retire.
Did it descend on you immediately? Did it feel the atmosphere that you were now part of a very exclusive club, or did that take a while? Or
you know, interestingly, I mean, obviously I had known many of these flag officers, so I felt like I understood what their lifestyle would be like and what you were expected to do. One of the first thoughts I had was, I get a chance maybe to go back to sea, because I really hadn't gone to sea with Carl Vinson except for sea trials. And that, interestingly, I was excited about the opportunity to maybe go serve back at sea again. That was
one of my, group commander.
As a potential strike group commander. I knew I'd have to do that in my second job, you know, should I get, you know, selected.
Okay, so what are some of the compulsories, knife and fork school kind of stuff? How does that, did it involve Linda, your spouse, as well?
Yeah, there's kind of 2 compulsories. The Navy has their own version of knife and fork school. The Chief of Naval Operations runs that. It's for all the newly selected civilians to the SES ranks and the new 1-star admirals, active and reserve. So, you know, it's a group, I think, of about 50 of us and our spouses that met with Admiral Gary Roughead for a week. And they talked to us everything about promotion opportunities, ethics, how you comport yourself, all those types of things you would expect. The thing I do remember is Admiral Roughead looking at all the 1-stars and saying, only 50% of you will make 2 stars. That's the deal. Those are the numbers. So, you know, enjoy your making flag. Half of you will not be a 2-star.
That's his first message.
That was his first message. Congratulations.
What I remembered. It's going to get tight fast.
Yeah.
Okay. So what was your first one-star job?
Well, my first one-star job was back in the joint community, which was interesting. I'd had 2 joint jobs as a senior non-flag officer, one at Central Command doing Tomahawk cruise missile planning, and then one at Joint Forces Command as the Chief of Staff for the Joint Warfighting Center. So I got selected to go back to Joint Forces Command, be the head of the Joint Enabling Capabilities Command, which was a deployable set of planners, strategic and operational planners, to communicators, to public affairs, to intelligence. It was a really cool one-star job because it was joint and it was operational. I was working for General Jim Mattis, who was the head of Joint Forces Command. Bob Harwood was the vice commander, the 3-star deputy commander.
Navy SEAL.
Navy
Later
SEAL.
begged off on being Donald Trump's vice president.
Yeah.
Nominee.
And he and I have stayed close over the years too. Interestingly, I replaced a Naval Academy classmate, something that would happen more than once in my career. Back then, Brigadier General Dave Beidler, Smoke, F4, F-18 pilot.
Yep.
And we were roommates after we graduated at the Naval Academy.
Okay.
So over plebe summer post-graduation, Dave and I lived together. So how fun was that 2 roommates get to replace each other?
He and I deployed together on the USS America.
Yeah.
He was in VMFA 251 when I was in VF 102. Great guy.
Yeah. So I went to my second knife and fork school while I was in there, a program called Capstone. Every military flag officer in all the services has to go to this basically 6-week program to include overseas travel, visiting other combatant commands, really understanding the joint nature of what it means to be a flag officer. Shortly after I did that, I am assigned to this unit. I'm in Suffolk, Virginia. The headquarters was in Norfolk. Later that year, Secretary of Defense Bob Gates announces that we're going to shut down Joint Forces Command. So that's significant. At the time, we had 10 combatant commands, 6 geographic commands, 4 what we kind of call functional commands. Think like Strategic Command, Transportation Command, Special Operations Command, and Joint Forces Command. We had never in our history shut down a combatant command. This announcement comes out, and General Mattis is leaving the command to go down to Central Command. Ray Odierno, 4-star coming out of Iraq, is now going to take over U.S. Joint Forces Command. And he pins the rose on me as a 1-star to do the entire detailed plan for how we would shut down Joint Forces Command. And that was an oh my gosh moment. Say, I don't know that I have any of the qualifications to figure out how to shut down arguably the most complex, large combatant command. It would have been commonly known as Velcro Command. Anything that started with a J for joint was attached to this command. There were 23 separate entities, directorates, commands. In fact, I still remember Lung Aquilino, now running a Pacific Command, Indo-Pacific Command, was a brand new 1-star working in the J3, the Joint Force Provider. And I got to work with him a little bit on this. Anyway, it was a shock.
Did they give you a time frame by which this had to be done?
Yeah, the announcement occurred, and I'm going to reflect on this. I think it was October of 2010, and we had till August of 2011 to get this done.
So basically 10 months.
Very short amount of time.
Okay.
And basically, it had to be in the can for all of it to occur in 8 months.
Okay.
So I literally deployed to the Pentagon and our remote office there and put together a small team, almost all civilians, by the way, to figure out what we were going to do.
Okay.
So the first meeting I had was with our Joint Forces Command Deputy Commander, an Army Spec Ops guy named Keith Huber, and we went to the office called CAPE, the Cost Assessment Program Evaluation, and Christine Fox is the head of it. And as you recall, she was kind of some of the inspiration for the movie Top Gun for Charlie.
She was Charlie, yeah.
Yeah. So General Huber and I are sitting in front of her. We're thinking, okay, well, we're just going to shut down some of the command. And she said, no, you don't understand the Secretary's direction. Shut it all down. That means it all goes away, the whole thing, everything. And we walked out of there going, oh my gosh, I don't think they understand how much this command does. And the reason for shutting it down was there was so many things that the services were doing that it was believed to be duplication for some of the mission sets. And because there was not enough expertise in some of the things that Joint Forces Command was doing, they were just hiring contractors. So almost half of the workforce were contractors. So not only was it Velcro command, it was also contract command. So I quickly started to see maybe there was something there to shutting it down. Anyway, to make a long story longer, we worked very hard, and we convinced Secretary Gates and Admiral Mullen in the tank that there were some portions of the Joint Forces Command that would be retained. So the Joint Warfighting Center that had a unique training mission, the JEC, which I had commanded, had a unique training mission that was now assigned to Transportation Command. The Joint Warfare Analysis Center, also a critical command that did some combat analysis for how to get things operationally done. So at the end of the day, we retained about maybe a third of the functions. We got rid of all the contracts. We saved the government about $2 billion over the FIDP, the 5-year defense plan, and we got it done.
So 2 takeaways that jump out at me. One is you have to have some level of, let's call it moral courage, to push back on the likes of Christine Fox. Yes, civilian control of the military, but that doesn't mean throw out baby with bathwater, right? And part B is there's no playbook for what you were just assigned, right? No. I mean, there's sort of a playbook from going from squadron CO to carrier CO to strike group commander. These are sort of familiar environments.
Right.
But you get this, hey, Slapshot, shut down this thing that has 27 heads and do it in 10 months.
Yeah.
So what did you draw on to get that done?
Well, first we had to understand that we were going to have to deal with members of Congress. They were not a fan of this because it meant workforce in their districts. Second is we had to make sure that the Joint Force was appropriately ready to be in a fighting force posture, which were some of the things that were done at Joint Forces Command. And then we had to convince the leadership that we put the right level of analytics to this. So I went back to my nuclear power training and used that mindset along with my team to create some analytical tools that were all tied all the way back to the Unified Command Plan, which is this strategic document that says what each of the combatant commands do. And then underpinning that are all the tasks and functions. So for Joint Forces Command, there were over like 2,200 very implicit and explicit tasks listed there. And we put this analytical tool against all of them. And that's how we determine which functions should be retained and which ones would go away.
So what were you leveraging in your pedigree to affect that as the strategy, as the way to solve this problem?
Well, at the end of the day, we knew we were going to have to brief the tank, which is, all the 4 stars of the services. Admiral Mullen was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. We eventually went in and actually briefed Secretary Gates on what we came up with and why. And you can imagine when we said, well, we still need to retain these certain functions, the first question was, did you not get the message? And I said, shut down? We said, well, we are going to shut down. We're going to case the colors. There'll be no more command. But these functions are so unique, using what we called a root cause analysis. This is a nuclear power way of thinking to doing that. And General Odierno did the brief. I was there. And we won that argument.
Okay.
Yeah.
So right from the get-go, you can see your 1-star job really starts to set the tone for what does it mean to be a flag officer.
It was one of the most complicated jobs I've ever had. And just as when you're a captain or a commander, you get a fitness report as a 1-star. And General Odierno and General Mattis wrote mine. It was obviously good enough. I made 2-star on my first look, and then I got assigned to go to sea again and be part of the Enterprise Carrier Battle Group or Carrier Strike Group.
And this is what we were talking about you had hoped would happen when you heard you were going to make flag, because now you get to go to sea on an aircraft carrier, something you didn't entirely get to do when you were a carrier CO.
And it perfectly lined up with my very odd career. I flew the last of the F-4 Phantoms on the oldest aircraft carrier, the USS Midway, to start my career. I flew and commanded the oldest F-14s in the fleet in 1999, and now I was going to take the oldest aircraft carrier on its last ride.
But you also, when you got your carrier CO job, you did an RCOH and didn't really take Vincent to sea necessarily. And so the signature of Slapshot's career is doing the hard jobs well, taking the bad deal and making it into this thing that is great.
I couldn't be more excited that I got to take Enterprise, 8 nuclear reactors, the first carrier we ever built, in 1960. And now we're going to take her on her last ride, last deployment, 25th deployment in her history. storied history. And I got to tell you, that was an 8-month deployment that was a combat deployment. We were still operating in Iraq, so we were in the Strait of Hormuz and in the Arabian Gulf, and then the North Arabian Gulf doing combat operations in Afghanistan.
You've already mentioned that Enterprise is unique. 8 reactors instead of 2 on Nimitz class and Ford class.
Yeah.
Bow's more narrow. I remember I've done some fleet CQ. I think I have, I want to say 15 traps some day, some night on Enterprise when we were aboard GW. GW was in the yard, so we had to do our fleet CQ aboard Enterprise. Bow is narrow, as we say.
Yeah,
you
right.
can't spread the wings on Tomcats on Cat 1 and 2.
Right.
But very fast. It's, I think, the fastest
And
ever.
a unique island structure. Remember, Enterprise was built with double-plated steel because it was part of this, you know, we might go to nuclear war someday. So the ship was heavier. The island was square, which gave a different airflow over the angled flight deck. So there was this historic thing about the burble, how you would drop faster
it's
in
worse
the middle.
than the Nimitz class.
Correct.
Okay.
So everybody kind of knew that. But you're right, she was super fast. One interesting sidebar, as we were bringing her home into Norfolk for the last time, we got permission from Naval Reactors to see how fast she should go one last time. I had 1,500 Tigers on board. We took everybody in the hangar bay all the way to the back end of the ship, and we took her to max speed. It was the second fastest she'd ever been in her life. Now, I won't say exactly how fast she went, but let's just say you could have definitely water skied behind her. And if the speed limit on the road was 40 miles an hour, you could have got a ticket.
Okay.
How's that?
Pretty clear?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the other signature of your career, and this we'll talk about even when you're superintendent at the Naval Academy, is you're always biased to getting into the cockpit.
Yeah.
But this is unusual for a strike group commander to attain or get permission to do this. So talk to us about how you were able to not just fly, but go over bad guy country during your time as strike group commander.
I was very fortunate. I was still physically capable of getting back in the swimming pool, getting the whole aviation physiology.
So how old are you at this time?
Well, I was 52 when I took command, and I was 53, turning 54 when we brought her home. So I was 53 most of my flying time on that 2012 deployment. But yeah, I went and did my aviation physiology qual for, I think, my 8th time in my career. Still hated getting in the pool. And I went to a full, Category 3 syllabus in the replacement air group squadron, VFA 106 at Oceana, and it was a full up round to go fly missions. And Vice Admiral Mark Fox was 5th Fleet as we came into theater. I went to go see him, and I asked permission to not only fly, but to fly operationally, including combat. And as I know you've talked about Mert, max rated thrust call sign, storied career of his own from Desert Storm.
MiG killer.
MiG killer, and put his weapons on target. He gave me full up green light to fly. So I did, and I fly every day at first. Remember, these missions were 9-10 hours long, 3 refuelings, go over Afghanistan, support the special operators on the ground. And it was just great. I flew with the youngest pilots in the Air Wing. I wanted to do that because they would tell me everything, which was awesome. I mean, I was like their flying grandpa, even though I was operational. And I was welcomed into all the ready rooms. I took all the NATOPS tests. I mean, I was just like I was a regular junior officer in the squadron, even though I was kind of a guest flyer.
This is CAG 1. What squadrons? These are Super Hornet squadrons. Which squadrons are we talking about?
Yeah, it was Air Wing 1. We had 2 F-18 Super Hornet F squadrons. So VFA 11 and VFA 211, which had the most modern AESA radar suite on board their airplanes. And that was a unique capability at the time. You could actually decouple the cockpits, front seat, back seat. Front seat could be doing air to air, back seat could be doing air to ground. Very cool capability. Again, I worked up to it, flew a combat mission into Afghanistan. I did not deliver a piece of ordnance on that particular day, but our wingman did. And it was just this amazing capability that you could see coming out of these Super Hornets. In this particular case, there was an enemy combatant that had put an IED into the ground, was spotted, verified, Navy SEALs talking to us, wingman spins off, and on less than a minute notice is tasked with taking out the motorcycle for which this enemy combatant is now riding away at 60 miles an hour. Not to kill that combatant, they wanted to capture him, but to take him out. So moving target, special capability, weapon, 500-pound weapon, dropped in front of the motorcycle's front wheel to throw the rider off, and they capture him.
Oh my gosh.
So amazing stuff.
Something the Lantern Pod could not do. It was not good
well,
with...
no.
So to that point, what is the elevator speech about the difference between being a Rio and being a Wizzo in the F model of the Super Hornet?
Well, I'm going to say this first, and for all the Rios from my Tomcat and Phantom days, please don't take this the wrong way. My first thought when I got on the airplane is, I am no longer needed, because the front seater could do everything that I could do, and because they were 25 and 27 years old, they were so good, the video game generation. And I was a little slow on the uptake at first, because there was so much buttonology in the F-18F and all blank screens. So you had to get to pages and do things. The front seater had all the same equipment in the front that I had in the back. But what I will say, and this is what I got out of some of these combat missions, when things got down tight, there had to be a shared set of responsibilities. So the Navy made a good decision in still keeping the F models, certainly for close air support, for forward air controller missions. So the technology that was at your fingertips in the Super Hornet was light years ahead of what we had in the Tomcat. I'd say the Tomcat was going from the first phones that you could take off the wall that didn't have a cord in it to now the modern day cell phone.
Okay,
that's the kind of jump in technology that we had. So during that deployment, because I was flying, I was close to breaking the all-time naval aviation carrier arrested landing record, which was 1,888. I broke that number, and it was right around that time that Mark Fox was turning over 5th Fleet to now Fozzie Miller.
A Tomcat Rio, a guy we've known for a long time.
Know very well, Naval Academy graduate, class 79. So I go in, we do the change of command on board the Enterprise. I go in and see Fozzie, and he knows that I've been flying. And he said, hey, I don't think it's a good idea for you to fly combat anymore. We just can't afford. What happens if you get shot down? That would be a bad scene. I said, okay, yes, sir, got it. And then he surprised me and said, but I want you to keep flying. I get the value of that. And, how hard would it be for you to break 2,000 carrier arrested landings? Like, sir, I'd love to do that. But
so what did you have at that time, roughly? 1,800
I had about,
and change?
I was closing in on 1,900. Okay. I might have just been over 1,900. And, we had arguably like 5.5 months of cruise left.
Okay.
And I said, but I have to fly almost every day. And he said, okay, just don't let it interrupt your job. So I did. I flew almost every single day, mostly night missions, and the time frame that I found that worked great with my job on board the ship was to fly the last night tanker mission, because then we were using F-18 Super Hornets with the pods on board to be our airborne refuelers. So and the Wizzos in the ready rooms weren't too keen on that mission.
That's not a
very fun mission.
Yeah.
So I did that, but I got to see how we were doing night operations and be in it myself. And I was usually the last airplane aboard, just before the final E-2 would come aboard. One interesting note is when we were inside the Arabian Gulf, I did do one daytime mission with VFA 11, the Red Rippers, and we had a fuel transfer problem in this F-18F. You can't land on a carrier with partial fuel tanks, so we couldn't go back and land on the Enterprise.
Well, what is that, a CG issue or something? Why can't you?
It turned out to just be a valve issue and the external tanks.
But why can't you land with partial?
Because there was this view that the tanks, the fuel would, even through the baffles, would come flying forward and rip the tanks off, and now you have a missile going down the front.
Oh, okay, the external tanks. Okay,
right.
Got it.
These are just external
tanks. And they're flying triple bubble, double bubble? How many tanks
we were
they got?
Flying triple bubble, as I remember, yeah. So we can't land on the carrier. We make the decision, and I'm flying with a really young pilot, very talented, and we're going to go land in Bahrain. So we're going to go land in Bahrain International. Not a great place to land, highly visible, but we're in an emergency. Well, what happened is all of a sudden a dust storm pops up. I mean, it's like right out of the scene of Mission Impossible. And you can see it coming overtaking the land, and we're like, we're not going to be able to get into Bahrain before this engulfs the airport. So we decide we're going to go land at a highly classified base that nobody knew we were operating down in another portion of Bahrain, and now we're racing to get there. We're racing against fuel that we have left that's available to us, and as we're getting closer to this base and we're going to turn south and do a button hook turn to the north to go land on the runway, the whole runway gets overtaken by the same dust storm. So now it's 0-0 visibility. We're running out of fuel, and my young pilot, and this goes back to old way of thinking. You got to do out of the box. There's no emergency procedure for this. There was no precision approach available. The Air Force didn't have that capability there, nor did the Navy or the Marine Corps. So we said, hey, we've got the most tight inertial nav system known to man. We dropped a waypoint at the end of the runway and flew our own self-controlled precision approach to that spot.
That's nuts.
And I told my young pilot, I said, we can take the airplane down to 10 feet. There was nothing around there that was going to hurt us. It was flat. And we'll spot the runway. And even if we fly 1,000 feet down the runway, we can still put it down plenty of runway. As it turned out, I don't know that he ever saw the runway. I did from the back seat. And we were on centerline, and he just put it right on down there, greased it on. We parked the airplane. There was a young airman that worked on fuel systems, and the F-18 just happened to be there, not working on F-18s. And she fixed our valve problem. We refueled, and we went back. We were landed on the Enterprise 2 hours later. Nobody knew I was gone. Nobody knew I made an emergency landing at a classified airbase.
So how much longer did that tour last?
So we finished an 8-month deployment. We did 8 port visits, 5 in the Middle East and 3 in the Med. And interestingly, as we came out of the Strait of Gibraltar, we had to thread the needle through 3 storms, 3 hurricanes that were brewing, one of which most viewers might remember, Hurricane Sandy, which at the time was the smallest. By the time we got across the Atlantic, Sandy had expanded into this 1,000-mile wide storm. We had to go almost all the way down to Puerto Rico before we pulled into Mayport with the Enterprise to offload some equipment. But it was an amazing experience driving that ship on its last deployment through 60-foot waves. I've never seen waves like that in my life. And I've been at sea 13 years of my 38 years. Green water over the bow hitting the island. All the airplanes in the flight deck triple chained and cocooned to keep the water out. So we had an interesting ride home, just as final ride of the Enterprise. So and then we took the Enterprise out of operational service on 1 December of 2012.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what was your next job, and how did you find out about those orders?
At this time, I'm a 2-star select. I haven't pinned it on yet. And I have no idea. This is the most interesting part of the flag career. It's that 2-star job where you could go almost anywhere. I'd already done joint, so that wasn't likely. The Chief of Naval Operations, John Greenert, met me when we brought the ship home. He was playing with a bunch of different jobs for me. And then he called me into his office along with then Mark Ferguson, the Vice Chief of Naval Operations, and said, Carter, we really don't know you all that well yet. We'd like to assign you to a task force for a problem that we think needs immediate attention. It was a topic of suicide and suicide-related behavior. So I got tasked to run this independent task force while I am the strike group commander. This is the end of 2012, early 2013. So I literally deployed to the Pentagon, had about 30 people from the medical community, chaplain community, and operational community, and we did a full study. Kind of like, I don't know anything about this, but I slept at a Holiday Inn Express last night, and I'm now an expert. And we wrote this report for the Navy on how to rethink our training, our culture, and our approach to suicide and suicide-related behavior. And it's still a relevant report today. We reduced suicide by 25% in 1 year after we introduced all these new training concepts. And it was during that time that the Chief of Naval Operations said, I think I'm interested in you going up to Newport to run the Naval War College. And my first meeting on that with the CNO was, I'd like you to write a paper for me on what you would do if you ran the Naval War College. So I got homework. This was over the Christmas break in 2012 going to 2013. So I really noodled on that. John Christensen, my classmate, was the president of the Naval War College at the time, the perfectly most suited guy to run the Naval War College. Graduated #1 in his Naval War College class. The faculty loved him. I did not go to the Naval War College. I technically didn't even have a master's degree because I was a nuke, sort of an equivalent. I had done courses at the Air War College and the Naval War College, and I let all that be known. So anyway, I wrote this paper for the CNO, and I sent it to him by email, and I didn't hear anything for like a week, like silence on the net. And I thought, well, this is bad. This is not going to go right. I'm finishing up this task force work, and on a snow day in the Pentagon, nobody in the Pentagon except the CNOs there. I had a sit-down meeting with him talking about the task force, and he said, I really liked what you wrote in the paper. And boom, now I'm getting orders to go run the Naval War College. So that's my second job, and I've not even got my second star on yet.
But you're still technically TR Strike Group at the same time, right? So you really have 3 hats.
That's right.
But at the same time, somebody had introduced, and this is where we talk about Bob Erskine, the idea of you going to the Naval Academy.
Yeah, he had whispered to me, what do you think about going to the Naval Academy? So I knew I might be considered for it, but the silent handshake agreement, this is how odd flag detailing is.
So let's talk about Bob Erskine. Explain to them who Bob Erskine is.
Bob Erskine is a living legend. He is one of the longest serving civilian executives. I think he was in that Flag Matters job for over 30 years. He had been enlisted in the Navy, commissioned as an officer, went all the way up to the rank of captain. I mean, his early career, he's hanging around with Chester Nimitz as a YN seaman. So this is how legendary Bob Erskine is.
So he's the flag detailer. He's the guy that gives admirals their orders.
He is. He's the guy that goes to the CNO and says, here's the range of who you might think about for that. So I'd say Bob Erskine was more of the flag whisperer.
Right.
And he would eventually do the detailing. And he also was the guy that would, in Flag Matters, put together the packages for flag retirements, because you have to be confirmed for your retirement as well as your confirmation.
I will tell you, when I was aide to Airlant, this is when Airlant was a 3-star job.
Right.
I got summarily yanked out of the RAG to go be Airlant, Admiral Les. I've talked about this on the channel several times. The thing you should know is when you're talking to a 3 or 4-star, unless the Admiral, the principal, says, do we have a clear line, you actually have 2 or 3 people on the phone, right?
Yes.
So the EA, the executive assistant, and the aide, if I'm there, will be on the phone. So I was on the phone when Bob Erskine called to tell Admiral Les that he was going home, that they did not have follow-on orders for him. This guy, as you said, was the flag whisperer, just very powerful guy.
He was. And he's the one that first introduced this idea of me going to the Naval Academy. But Admiral Greener, and again, you point out, I'm doing like 4 jobs. I'm a strike group commander. I've done this task force work for suicide. I'm preparing to go to the Naval War College, and I led the first 21st Century Sailor Office, which was an office to look at all of the social issues that were starting to really become a problem in the Navy. So I only had that job for a few months. I stood it up. But I was supposedly going to go to the War College, do that job for 2 or 3 years, and then move on to the same operational path as a numbered fleet commander, like 6th Fleet in the Med or 7th Fleet in the Pacific. Very excited about all that.
Well, when you say you were supposedly, again, this is part of the Admiral world,
right,
where there are conversations and there are, let's call them drug deals that are worked out. Nothing's promised and nothing's for sure, but it was kind of CNO saying, hey, Slapshot, do this thing, and then this is probably what we're thinking about after that.
That's true. And of course, to go to Newport, take over from my classmate, I got pinned on with my 2nd star. By the way, it's the shortest rank I've ever had in my life because, if you're a plebe or a sophomore youngster or a first class, you have those ranks for 1 year.
Yeah.
I was a 2-star for about 10 months.
Okay.
As it turned out. But, I really liked going up to Newport. And Newport, even though it was a 2-star job, still had remnants of a 3-star position because of the house, the amount of community and social engagement that it did. So that job came with, young culinary specialists that prepared some meals, people that took care of the house. So there's a level of responsibility that comes with that was different than some of the other 2-star jobs. And of course, we welcomed all that. That was something that we enjoyed doing. And as this job in Newport is going along fine, about 5 months into it, the Vice Chief of Naval Operations, now Bill Moran, calls me and says, you need to go down and interview for the superintendent job of the U.S. Naval Academy with the Secretary of the Navy, who was Ray Mabus. So it's like, well, there's a change.
Because you'd only been in the job
a couple months.
Yeah. So the theme here, in case you're not getting it, is max entropy.
Absolutely. So I go down and do the meeting with Secretary Mabus. I walk into his office, have no idea what's coming. And he said, this isn't really an interview. I'm just taking a look at everybody. I'm eyeballing everybody that might be in the pool for this job. You're not it, because you're a little too much like Mike Miller. So Mike Miller was the superintendent. He was a naval aviator, flew S3s, had a carrier strike group, and big, tall, lean guy. And he looks at me and goes, you look a little too much like Miller without the mustache. So, and he says, great to see you. Now go back to Newport.
Okay.
So I go back, I call Bill Moran. I said, okay, well, you obviously know I'm not getting that job. What's still in the offering? And all of a sudden, everything started to shift again. Maybe a numbered fleet, maybe not. Maybe be the air boss, who was Dave Buss at the time. And then I just said, well, I'm happy to be here. I don't really want to go anywhere just yet. So fast forward about 2 more months later, so now I've been there for about 6 months, I get a call that the Secretary of the Navy is coming to Newport to tell me something, whatever that means. So I go in the sedan, pick him up at Quonset Naval Air Station, where he lands. He gets in the car, shakes my hand, says, congratulations, you're going to be the next superintendent of the Naval Academy. Boom.
So how long had you been again at the War College at that time?
I think I had been there about 6 months. I was going to end up with a little bit over a year at the War College.
So just another side note about your time as the War College president, that was traditionally a 3-star job.
Yeah.
Right, and we had talked earlier about the fact that Admiral Stockdale was the president as a 3-star.
Yeah.
That's where I met him. I had some dealings with him later on, got to know him pretty well, actually. That's when my dad was going through the Naval War College as a Marine Corps colonel, and we lived at Fort Adams around the bay there. But you were a 2-star.
Yeah, so I was actually a 1-star, 2-star select when I took over.
Okay.
And that was a little bit controversial. So I was the first 1-star to take over the War College. And as you point out, I mean, the presidents of that oldest war college in the world were storied. I mean, think about Stansfield Turner, who would go on to be the head of the CIA, who changed the whole war college curriculum. It was called the Stansfield Revolution, Stansfield Turner Revolution.
Well, but that was the nature of your paper, though, right? Was sort of go back to the Stansfield Turner model.
I went back to some of the things that he did to help re-operationalize the War College, which is something they're still doing today, and I'm very proud of that.
Okay. Because they'd gotten away from that into more sort of an academic.
Yeah, and of course it is an academic situation there, but they do so many other things between some of the war games, some of the other special study groups that are classified, and that needed to be moved more to the front burner.
Okay.
So as you point out, there were, I mean, remember, Ray Spruance as a 4-star ran the Naval War College post-World War II. Art Sabrowski, the kind of the beginning of, some of our internet technology and interconnected Navy was there with some of his visionary thinking. And of course, Admiral Stockdale, that was the end of his career. In fact, there's a famous story about Stockdale with his son Jimmy in the office when Hyman G. Rickover calls Stockdale at the office. And Rickover calls Stockdale to say how displeased he was with the curriculum that Stockdale was running at the War College, that they had gone away from the technical and were exploring much more into the deep thinking. Well,
that was Stockdale, right?
Stockdale,
Epictetus.
Yes, Stockdale.
Right? He was a philosopher.
Pulls the phone away from his ear. I mean, there's this loud voice just yelling, which Rickover was known to do. And Jimmy is testament to this, and he's told me the story. And then Admiral Stockdale very calmly puts the phone back to his ear and says, Admiral Rickover, I greatly respect your opinion on this, but you have never spent a day in combat. Goodbye.
Great line.
Hangs up the phone.
Nice.
So
Nice.
anyway, there's some really cool, interesting stories, particularly from Stockdale's time there that we got to enjoy and know that we lived in the same house that he did.
So War College fun fact, I know you know this, but maybe the audience doesn't know it. Created from a Proceedings magazine article written by Stephen Luce.
Yeah.
And Luce Hall, that elegant building on the banks of the Narragansett, is named for him. He was the first president of the Naval War College.
And buried in Rhode Island.
Roger. And also there's a building over at the Naval Academy named Luce Hall as well.
Yeah.
So let's talk about your time at the Naval Academy.
So, boom, it happens, and we are now scrambling to get ready. We come down here in July of 2013, turn over with Mike Miller. Huge crowd for his retirement ceremony in our tank. It was one of the hottest days I ever recall being. I think it was like over 100 degrees. And we start. And of course, we have no promise. Title 10 law says that the Service Academy superintendents, which are a unique position in our flag ranks, must be in that job for 3 years. It's a requirement for continuity. And it also says that you will retire from that job. And it was about a month prior to taking over, and I get this email from the vice chief, Bill Moran, and it was that wake-up call. I had to sign a piece of paper that says, I understand and acknowledge that at the end of my tour, I am to retire.
Okay.
So you talk about that phone call from Flag Matters. It was already known, but it was that slap in the face, like, this is it.
And what's the reason so that you're not a political operator when you're the superintendent, or what's the history of that requirement?
Yeah, the Service Academy jobs have gone and evolved so much over the years. Back when we were there, it was not a 3-star job. You came into this job as a 2-star. Some of our superintendents made their 3rd star, but many of them went on to another job. So Admiral Bill Lawrence would go on to be the head of personnel, 3rd Fleet. Kennard McKee went on to be the head of naval reactors. A number of these officers would go on and have either continued 3 or 4-star careers. But it was somewhere along the way that we'd had some challenges with the behavior of superintendents looking towards their next job instead of being focused on what was so important to do this job. And, not to go into much detail, but a lot of our superintendents didn't survive their tours here. It's such a large, complex thing, and it's like being the captain of the ship. It might not have been your fault that you hit a buoy in the navigational channel, but you're responsible. So if somebody had some sort of accounting problem, finances,
cheating scandal or some other
you're in charge. So
cultural problems.
That often would end a career either at the 2 or 3-star level. So, that was implemented sometime around the late 1980s, 1990s. Chuck Larson is a shining example. He's the only superintendent that served twice, came in as a 2-star, made his 3rd star, and then came back after the big cheating scandal in 93 and was superintendent again for 4 more years as a 4-star.
As a 4-star.
Yeah. So, and it was interesting, when I came into the job, a contract company called IDA, a bunch of defense analysts came in and did a full 138-page, and you can find it online, series of recommendations for how to select a superintendent, how to evaluate them, and how you decide how long they stay.
Okay.
So that was produced my first year as superintendent. And as it turned out, some of the findings in that ended up coming to roost with me, because Linda and I stayed for not only 3 years, but an extra 4th year, and then eventually a 5th year.
So you live, in fact, the last time you and I were in your residence, it was the Buchanan House, which is the superintendent's residence on the Naval Academy grounds. So tell us a little bit about what makes that residence special.
So before I took over, again, CNO John Greenert called me in his office and gave me kind of the sailing orders. So this wasn't just, some of the things I need you to pay attention to the Naval Academy. He had a whole chapter of discussion with me about the house. Now, remember, Buchanan House was built in 1906. It was so grand when it was first built. It was the Naval Academy's hospital at first. Roosevelt came here when they brought the body of John Paul Jones and actually visited Buchanan House. Now, back then it was just called, the superintendent's house. Kennard McKee named it after the first superintendent of the Naval Academy, Buchanan, in 1976.
There's a fun fact about Buchanan,
Yeah.
controversial.
Very.
What is that?
So Buchanan, as a Navy captain, went into the Secretary of the Navy's office and said, I'm going to fight for the Confederacy. Decided to change his mind the next day, and the Secretary of the Navy said, no, you've made your decision, go fight for the Confederacy. So he became the Confederate admiral, lost every battle he was ever in, particularly the Battle of Mobile Bay when Admiral Farragut does the famous damn the torpedoes full speed ahead. So there is some controversy about him because the house is named after the first superintendent. So anyway, we kept the Buchanan house name our entire tour, but the house is unique. It's 16,500 square feet of mansion, 43 rooms in the house. There is no other house in the Department of Defense at any service level or the joint level that is like that house. It's on the campus. It's the second most visited house in the country, second only to the White House for anything in the Department of Defense. So there's a lot of responsibility that comes with just maintaining that house. You have to have a sense of ownership, even though you're only renting it. There are people that are assigned to the house that are culinary specialists, people that come to help take care of the house. I've never had a staff that was designated to do that. And that staff changed even during my time there because of some of the government requirements. But at the end of the day, we had people there to take care of that house. And we were hosting events there multiple times a week. So it's a big part of the superintendent job amongst all the other responsibilities. And the other superintendents at Army and at Air Force, they do that, but not to that same degree.
So we mentioned at the outset when your first one-star job, there was no playbook for shutting down Joint Forces Command.
Yeah.
There's no way to know fully. I mean, you and I went to school there. We watched Kinder McKee and Admiral Lawrence, and you can have some sense of what the job entails. But for those who are unaware, because you're dealing with the Faculty Senate, you're dealing with the Athletic Association, you're dealing with the Brigade of Midshipmen, as you mentioned, you're hosting social events, alumni. So what are the different hats and the moving parts of being the superintendent that maybe folks don't realize?
You think you go into a job where you went to school and you think this is a job you've been prepared for all your life. And then you quickly find out that as much as you think things are the same and that we live on tradition, none of that is the same. You're dealing with a different generation of young men and women as midshipmen. Family members were very different. Everything's connected, social media. It was as complex a thing as I'd ever stepped into. And this is an organization for which I thought I knew a lot. You wear multiple hats. So you are the superintendent, which is a unique title. It's like being the president of a college or university. So all those responsibilities are there. But you're also a military commander still. You are the only person that actually has oversight of your grounds. So as we created Naval Installations Command, which still has a relationship with the superintendent is actually in charge of the grounds, which are historic. 354 acres of land, roughly 50 buildings. The biggest monster is Bancroft Hall, a unique structure, a single point failure because we don't have other places to house midshipmen. The largest dormitory in the world, replacement value somewhere around $2.5 to $3 billion. 8 wings, of which one should be shut down always for repairs. So all these things now you realize I am in charge of the plant, the infrastructure, and that's a humongous responsibility. I think my shipyard experience prepared me well for that and understanding budgets. And meanwhile, thanks to Mike Miller and Congress and the Chief of Naval Operations, we had authority to start building Hopper Hall. So the vast majority of all that, the contracting, the building, the problems, the naming, that all happened on my watch. So that's probably the last major academic building to put on the Naval Academy grounds without taking something else down.
So what people may not know that are unfamiliar with the Naval Academy, the perimeter is all reclaimed land, kind of like Holland, and the sports fields out on Hospital Point. Hopper Hall, whoever does these plans and this, originally, and keep me honest here, they didn't plan for enough things to hammer into the sandy seabed, and so they had to like quadruple that number, and that delayed the project for a year?
We almost lost the contract, or it was going to be delayed 2 years. And this is a unique relationship that I had with the Chief of Naval Operations, John Richardson at the time, the Secretary of the Navy. And I jumped over all of the engineering commands and all the people that work in that. I said, I need extra money. I need it in the budget right now, or else we're going to go backwards, and this will be a disaster. And they did that. So we actually pumped in about another $30 million into the contract, kept it going. And as anybody that's come to the grounds and seen it, it's a unique capability. We were the first major university in the country to have a certified, accredited cyber operations program in a building that has classified capability. I mean, from vision to strategic thinking to tactical building, it all got done. And that became a big part of my tour here because that could not fail. That was really important.
So another call that you made, less fleet biased as the Cyber Center, the Chapel Dome.
Yes.
So talk to us about the command decision you made associated with that.
Yeah, nobody wanted to be the superintendent that turned the green patina, beautiful Chapel Dome to a shiny brown dome. It's a very thin piece of copper that covers that dome. The chapel had been built in the early 1900s, and when they put the first dome up, and if you go back and look at pictures of it, it was spectacular, beautiful, but it leaked badly. So that first dome roofing, if you will, only lasted a couple years, and then they put up the dome that we had known for so many years. It's designed to last 100 years. It fell short. It was starting to have other problems, the connections between the copper pieces and even the flat part of the roof. So the decision was made that we had to replace that at basically the 90-year point. So we contracted, put the plan together, and that reconstruction effort started just as I was getting ready to leave. And now, of course, you can see it's finished. It has a beauty unto itself. I mean, it's still shiny, it's brownish, and of course, over time, that will turn into a green patina, but that's going to take another 20, 25 years.
You know, you made a command decision, consolidated, because what were you telling me about even the scaffolding cost? That's where the most cost was in putting up the scaffolding.
It's that and the work, and of course...
So why do it twice when you can do it once?
Right, and you got to remember, fly the airplane while you're repairing it, because you still have to have services, you know, funerals, weddings, all that. So to be able to do that and manage that with all the grounds, because everything's so tight, the scaffolding was a huge, huge piece of that. And you're right, that was probably 60% of the contract price was just the scaffolding and the workforce that went with it.
So speaking of fly the airplane, as I said before, you're always operationally biased. So you got to fly with the Blue Angels while you were the superintendent of the Naval Academy. That's nuts.
Again, just like much of the things that happened in my life, completely unplanned. So it's 2016. I've been in the job now for like 3 years. The Blues come and do a show every year for graduation. And the third garden party of us hosting the parents of the graduates, the Blues come to that event. So they come into the Buchanan house. We do a big picture. They're all in their blue flight suits. They go out and interact with the families. It's a highlight. So Ryan Bernacki is the Blue Angel commanding officer. Interestingly, Ryan was a stash ensign working for me in Miramar back in 1996.
Oh my God.
And we got him a Tomcat hop. He goes to fly. And now here he is. I hadn't seen him, you know, in like 30 years or 25 years. And he's at my house. He's a Blue Angel Air Boss. And of course, I know he's coming. I'm excited to see him. And he comes right up to me. He goes, "When are you going to go fly with us again?" I said, "You know, I'm all in. I'll come out to El Centro while you're training next year, and I'll go fly with you guys." And he says, "How about tomorrow?" I said, "You mean like flying the show?" He said, "Yeah. We would like you to fly with us in the actual show over the Naval Academy grounds as a 3-star superintendent."
So you still had your seat quals and all the other swim phys was still active.
And I'm 57.
Okay.
And he reminds me right that night, he said, "You would be the oldest to ever fly with us, let alone in a show." So, of course, I need permission. You know, he's okay with it.
Yeah.
So I call the CNO, John Richardson. This is on a Tuesday night. They're doing the show on Wednesday. I got a hold of him right away. He said, "Yeah, go." And then I have to call the secretary. And I could not get a hold of Ray Mabus for whatever reason, he might have been out of country. You know, I emailed him. And of course, I need one more permission, which is more important than all of them. Linda.
Mrs. Carter.
And we host a big, you know, top-end reception that day, of which I am not going to be
there, yeah.
So she, not happy, but says yes.
When are you going to grow up, Ted?
Right.
She may have said.
Something like that. It might not have been that nice. And then Ray Mabus got a hold of me at midnight. And he made the comment that, well, I've never flown with the Blue Angels. I said, sir, well, you should go next year. I mean, but, you know, I got this opportunity. Of course, he says, yeah, you should go do it. So, interesting. The next morning, I'm at my desk, and I get a phone call from Sinatra, who's Del Bull, who had been in the Top Hatters with me. He goes, well, I got good news and bad news. The good news is you can still fly with the Blue Angels. I said, well, what's the bad news? He goes, well, the two-seat jet is right now set up as the lead solo airplane. And he said, we've never put a guest rider for air show typically in any of the lead solos because they'll pull 9 Gs, no G suits. So I'm like, you know, it was like, you still want to do it. What do you think the answer is going to be, right? So then Ryan Bernacchi calls me and says, hey, we all voted and we know that you can do this. So we're in. Are you okay? I said, I'm in. I'm coming. Let's go to the brief. So go to the brief. I've been with the Blues before. I've never thought about what it would be to be in the lead solo, the number 5 jet, compared to being in the diamond formation. Completely different animal.
Yeah.
So I haven't flown operationally since 2012. It's 4 years. No G suit. Get in the jet. We take off out of Andrews. As we come over the Naval Academy, over the Severn River, number 5 and number 6 does the split off. I mean, we're just talking a 4G clearing turn. And I was like, oh, this is going to be a long day. But you know, it's interesting. Muscle memory takes over. And even without a G suit, I quickly realized that, you know, this is a 45-minute show. And you know, we're at basically sea level. There's no air conditioning in the legacy F-18 two-seat jet. So it's 100 degrees in the cockpit. But it doesn't matter. I mean, it's just as fun a thing as you can possibly imagine as an aviator. And of course, I was really anticipating that number 5 jet does the min-radius turn maneuver. So you're talking 6 going to 8 Gs for about 45 to 50 seconds. And I said, if I can get through that, I'll be good with the rest of it. And of course, you get lipstick cameras videotaping you the whole time, so there's no faking it.
Right.
If you take a nap,
yes,
you're on camera.
Yes.
And the young man I'm flying with, who had been a top hatter, by the way, we had an agreement. I said, if I pass out and you can't get me back, what are you going to do? He said, well, I'll split off and they'll go to the 5-plane show. I'm like, okay, so now I've got some serious pressure.
Yeah.
So as we go through the min-radius turn, I mean, the first 90 degrees was the onset. I got out in front of it. I'm grunting. I'm pulling from my thighs, my glutes, everything. I'm back. I'm giving everything. And he's talking to me the whole time like he's, you know, just normal conversation. And I got my eyes on the horizon. And now I'm trying to talk just to kind of keep myself engaged. And now I can start to see the darkness showing up on the sides. And it's coming. And now we're at the 270 degree turn, and I can see my vision is about 45 degrees out in front of me. And I finally gave it one last big grunt, and it came back out. So I was there. It was good. The whole show was glorious. I was amazed at how close 5 and 6 come to each other. I mean, it's hard to describe. You've seen it on video. It's different even in person. And everything's good. I had no naps, the whole thing. I'm having the time of my life. We go back, and you know, I had remembered to lock my harness on every maneuver, except for the pitch up, tuck under brake back at Andrews. So, you know, we're, I think, the third to do the pitch up. And as he does the 9G pitch, 270 tuck under, my whole body jackknifed because I'm not locked in my harness. And I literally put my head between my knees. And of course, he's laughing. He's looking at me in the camera. I've gone. I've left. He's like, Admiral, you okay back there? And I said, I'm looking for my beer down here. I probably would have passed out, honestly, if I had my harness locked, because it's almost like post-mission letdown.
Yeah.
But thankfully, I didn't. we had a big chuckle about it. So that night, I believe it was the 70th anniversary of the history of Blue Angels. I am their keynote speaker for all these formers that come to town for this big event. And they've got a screen set up with the camera ready to go with over-under bets on how many times Slapshot passed out.
Oh, okay.
And those that voted 0 won.
Nice. Good.
So anyway, it was a great way to finish my operational career of flying with the Blue Angels. Nothing better. So this is the footnote story to the Blue Angels, not told before.
Okay.
So the day after I fly with the Blue Angels, Linda, who doesn't throw away anything, comes down from the attic and she says, I've saved this. It's a postcard from Pensacola, Florida, the day I arrived in flight school. We're engaged to be married, so this is 1981. I send her a postcard of the Blue Angels flying the A4 over Pensacola Beach, and on the back, can't wait to see you at Thanksgiving. I arrived here safely in Pensacola. Here's me flying with the Blue Angels, ha ha ha, maybe someday. And Blue Angel number 5.
Oh my God.
And on the front of the postcard, I circled Blue Angel number 5.
Wow. That's
And she said,
eerie.
You're done.
That's it.
And no kidding, I had many offers while I was superintendent to go fly off the Ford.
Okay.
And that was it, did not. So that's when we ended our chapter
So,
of flying.
for the record, your final aviation stats, flight hours, and arrested landings.
Yeah. Final 6,350 flying hours, 1,000 in the Phantom, a little over 1,000, 4,400 in the Tomcat. And then the rest are a combination of A6, EA6B, T45. Believe it or not, I have about 50 hours in T45, and then about 500 hours in the F-18 Super Hornet.
Okay.
2,016 carrier-arrested landings. My last landing was the last body to cross the ramp of the USS Enterprise at night.
So, is that still the record?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Tough to beat because we just don't fly as much operationally as we used to.
Right.
And I was through the height of all that.
So, Admiral, it's great to have you on the channel once again. It's even better to be in person in your beautiful home here in Annapolis. So thanks for the time, and we look forward to seeing you at the football game in a few hours.
Thanks, Mooch. Always good to be with you. Go Navy.
Go Navy.
Houston.
Roger that. All right, that's going to do it for this episode. If you're not already a subscriber, click the button and ring the bell so you don't miss anything. And if you'd like to help support the channel, please consider using the super thanks, the heart icon below, or become a patron at patreon.com/WardCarroll. And in the meantime, I look forward to talking to you again very soon.